The evening was loud inside the restaurant. Soft music played in the background, glasses clinked, and quiet laughter moved from table to table. The place was warm, bright, and full of people dressed in clean coats and shiny shoes. Outside, the street was cold. Cars passed by, splashing water from the road onto the sidewalk. Near the door stood a young girl. She was thin, small for her age, and wore an old jacket that looked too big for her. The sleeves covered part of her hands, and the zipper was broken. Her shoes were worn down, with small cracks near the front. She held her hands together, rubbing them slowly to keep warm. Her hair was tied back neatly. Even though it looked like she had done it without a mirror, she took a small step forward and pushed the heavy glass door open. Warm air rushed over her face. For a moment, she just stood there, unsure if she should go in. The smell of food made her stomach tighten. It had been a long day, and she had not eaten much. People inside noticed her almost right away. Some looked at her for a second and then turned back to their meals. Others watched a little longer, their eyes moving from her jacket to her shoes. A few faces showed discomfort, as if her presence did not belong in that space. The girl walked slowly toward the front desk. Her steps were quiet. She stopped in front of the hostess, a woman dressed neatly in black with her hair pulled back tightly. The hostess glanced at the girl, then quickly looked down at the list in her hands. "Can I help you?" the hostess asked, her voice polite but distant. "Yes," the girl said softly. "I was wondering if I could sit for a little while." The hostess looked at her again, this time more carefully. Her eyes paused on the jacket, then the shoes, then the girl's face. "We are fully booked," she said. "Do you have a reservation?" The girl shook her head. "No, I don't." The hostess sighed lightly. "Then I'm sorry. There are no tables available." The girl glanced around. She could see a few empty tables near the back. Some had not been cleared yet, but others were ready. She hesitated, then spoke again. "I don't need much," she said. "I can wait." The hostess's smile faded. "This is not a place to wait. You'll need to leave." The words landed hard. The girl's face grew warm, and she lowered her eyes. A man standing nearby heard the exchange and frowned but said nothing. A couple at a nearby table paused their conversation, watching quietly. "I understand," the girl said, though her voice trembled. "I'll go." She turned slowly, feeling every pair of eyes on her back. Each step toward the door felt heavier than the last. She reached for the handle when a voice behind her spoke again. "Wait," the hostess said. The girl turned, hope flashing briefly in her eyes. The hostess continued, "If you're looking for help, there's a shelter 2 streets down. They can guide you." The girl nodded once. "Thank you." She stepped outside. The cold air hit her again, sharper this time. She stood just outside the door, unsure where to go next. The sounds from inside the restaurant faded as the door closed behind her. She did not walk away right away. Instead, she moved a few steps to the side and leaned against the wall. Through the large window, she could still see inside. The lights were soft and golden. The piano near the corner caught her eye. Her gaze stayed there. The piano was polished and black, its surface reflecting the lights above. A man in a suit had been playing earlier, filling the room with gentle music. The girl had heard it from the street before she ever came inside. That sound was what had drawn her there in the first place. She closed her eyes for a moment and imagined the keys beneath her fingers. She could almost feel them smooth, cool, familiar. Music was the one thing that made the world feel quiet to her inside. The hostess returned to her work as if nothing had happened. The diners continued eating. The man at the nearby table shook his head slightly, then picked up his fork again outside. The girl stayed still. Her thoughts drifted back to a small room with peeling paint and a piano that barely stayed in tune. It was old and scratched, but to her, it was everything. She had learned to play by listening, copying sounds she heard on the radio or from open windows. She never had lessons. She never had money for them, but she practiced whenever she could. Even when her fingers hurt, music helped her forget hunger. It helped her forget the long nights when the power went out. It helped her forget the looks people gave her when they saw where she came from. A waiter passed by the window and noticed her still standing there. He paused, then looked away, uncomfortable. Another guest glanced out and whispered something to the person beside them. The girl shifted her weight from one foot to the other. She knew she should leave. She knew she did not belong there. Still, something kept her rooted to the spot. Inside the restaurant, the piano sat quiet now. The man who had played earlier was gone. The bench was empty. The girl pressed her palm lightly against the cold glass. Her reflection stared back at her, small, pale, unsure. She pulled her hand away quickly, afraid someone might see. Minutes passed. The sky outside darkened, and the streetlights flickered on. The restaurant grew busier. Laughter rose and fell like waves. The girl took a deep breath. She straightened her jacket and stepped back toward the door. Her heart beat fast, not from fear alone, but from something stronger. A need she could not ignore. She opened the door again. The warmth returned, along with the noise. This time, more people noticed her. A few eyebrows lifted. Someone whispered, "Didn't she just leave?" She walked past the hostess without stopping. The hostess turned sharply. "Hey," she began. But the girl did not run. She did not shout. She simply kept walking, her eyes fixed on the piano. A waiter stepped forward. "Miss, you can't be here," he said. Reaching out, she stopped and turned to face him. Her face was calm, but her hands shook. "Please," she said. "Just one moment." The waiter hesitated. The room had gone quieter. People were watching now. The hostess hurried over. "This is not allowed," she said firmly. "You need to leave right now." The girl swallowed. "I won't cause trouble," she said. "I just want to sit there for a moment." The hostess crossed her arms. "That piano is for guests." "I know," the girl replied. "I won't touch it if you say no." Silence filled the space between them. The hostess looked around, aware of the attention. From a table nearby, an older man cleared his throat. "Let the child speak," he said quietly. The hostess glanced at him, annoyed. "Sir, this is a private establishment." The man nodded. "And she's a child." The girl stood still, her eyes lowered. Her breathing was slow and careful. "I heard the piano from outside," she said softly. "It reminded me of home." The room stayed quiet. Even the kitchen sounds seemed to fade. The hostess hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "This is highly inappropriate," she said. "I'll leave right after." The girl added quickly, "I promise." A few guests exchanged looks. Someone whispered, "What harm could it do?" The hostess took a breath. She looked at the manager across the room. He raised his eyebrows slightly, unsure. The girl waited. Her fingers twitched at her sides, as if already remembering the music. Finally, the hostess spoke again. "1 minute," she said sharply. "That's it." The girl's eyes lifted in surprise. "Thank you," she said. She walked toward the piano, each step careful and respectful. She did not rush. She did not smile. She simply sat down on the bench, her feet barely touching the floor. The room held its breath. Her hands hovered above the keys. And then she placed her fingers down. The girl sat still on the piano bench. The room felt different now, as if the air itself had slowed down. People were no longer eating. Forks rested halfway to mouths. Conversations faded into silence. She looked at the keys for a long moment. They were cleaner than any piano she had ever touched. The white keys shone under the lights. The black keys reflected her face, small and serious. Her hands trembled slightly, not because she was scared of playing, but because she knew she did not belong there. Every sound, every light, every watchful eye reminded her of that. Still, the piano felt familiar. It felt like a friend waiting patiently. She took a slow breath and pressed the first key. The sound was soft, clear, and steady. It floated through the room like a quiet question. A second note followed, then a third. Her shoulders relaxed as her fingers began to move. The shaking stopped. She was no longer in the restaurant. In her mind, she was back in the small room she shared with her family. The walls were thin. The floor creaked. The old piano sat near the window, one leg supported by a folded book. She remembered how cold it felt in winter, how she played with gloves on when the heater stopped working. Her fingers moved faster now, finding a melody she had played many times before. It was not fancy. It was not loud, but it carried feeling. Each note told a quiet story of long nights, empty plates, and hope that refused to disappear. Inside the restaurant, something shifted. A woman near the front table lowered her glass slowly. Her eyes filled with tears she did not expect. A man across from her leaned back in his chair, his expression softening. The waiter who had tried to stop the girl stood frozen, his hand still holding a tray. The hostess watched from a distance. Her arms were no longer crossed. She did not speak. For the first time that evening, she truly looked at the girl. The music grew stronger, but never harsh. It filled the room without demanding attention. It asked people to listen, and they did. The girl's face remained calm. Her eyes were half closed. She swayed slightly as she played, moving with the rhythm. The restaurant lights reflected off the piano's surface, but she did not notice. She only felt the keys beneath her fingers, warm now from her touch. A child at a nearby table climbed onto their chair to see better. Their parent did not stop them. No one minded. In the kitchen, a cook leaned against the counter, wiping his hands on his apron as he listened. The clatter of dishes had stopped. Even the soft hum of conversation from outside seemed far away. The girl reached a pause in the music. The silence that followed was deep and full, not empty. No one moved. No one breathed too loudly. She began again, this time slower. The melody carried sadness, but also comfort. It sounded like goodbye and welcome at the same time. A man sitting alone near the back felt his throat tighten. He had not thought about his childhood home in years, but suddenly it was there, clear as day. Another guest pressed a napkin to her eyes, embarrassed by her tears, but unable to stop them. The hostess took a step forward, then stopped herself. She did not want to break the moment. The girl played on. She remembered playing when the lights went out, using the faint glow from the street lamp outside her window. She remembered neighbors banging on the wall, telling her to stop. She remembered playing softer, quieter, refusing to give up. This piano responded differently. Every note sounded clean. Every key answered her touch without hesitation. It felt like being heard for the first time. Her fingers slowed again as the song reached its end. The final note lingered in the air, gentle and honest. She lifted her hands and let them rest in her lap. For a moment, nothing happened. Then someone clapped. It was hesitant at first. One set of hands, then another. Soon the sound grew louder, spreading across the room. Applause filled the restaurant, warm and sincere. Some people stood, others remained seated, clapping with tears on their faces. The girl looked up, startled. She had not expected this. She had only wanted to play. She stood quickly, stepping away from the piano as if afraid she had done something wrong. Her cheeks flushed red. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I'll leave now." Her voice cut through the applause, and the clapping slowly faded. The hostess stepped forward. "Wait," she said. The girl froze. The hostess's voice was different now. "You don't need to apologize." The girl nodded, unsure what to say. She kept her eyes on the floor. The manager approached as well, his expression thoughtful. "That was unexpected," he said. The girl clasped her hands together. "I didn't mean to disturb anyone." "You didn't," the manager replied. "You moved people." A guest spoke up from nearby. "That was beautiful," she said. "Truly." Another added, "Where did you learn to play like that?" The girl hesitated. "I just listen," she said, "and practice." The room filled with quiet murmurs. People looked at her differently now, not with judgment, but with curiosity and respect. The hostess cleared her throat. "You said you'd leave," she reminded gently. The girl nodded again. "Yes." She turned toward the door, her heart heavy but calm. She had done what she came to do. "Hold on," the older man from earlier said, pushing his chair back. "At least let her sit." The hostess looked uncertain. The manager thought for a moment. "We can arrange something," he said slowly. The girl stopped walking. "Come here," the manager said. "Please," she returned, cautious. "We denied you a table earlier," he continued. "That wasn't right." The hostess lowered her eyes. "There's a small table near the window," the manager said. "You can sit there." The girl's lips parted in surprise. "I don't have money," she said honestly. "That's not important right now," he replied. She looked around the room. So many faces watched her. She felt small again. "Thank you," she said quietly. A waiter guided her to the table. She sat carefully, resting her hands on her lap. The chair felt soft. Too soft. Someone placed a glass of water in front of her. She whispered another thank you. As the restaurant slowly returned to life, people continued to glance her way, not because she looked out of place anymore, but because they wanted to remember her. The girl took a small sip of water. Her hands were steady now. For the first time that evening, she felt warm. She did not know that this moment was only the beginning. She only knew that the music had spoken when she could not, and somewhere deep inside, a door had opened that could never fully be closed again. The girl sat quietly at the small table near the window. The glass of water in front of her caught the light, and she watched it as if it might disappear if she looked away. Around her, the restaurant slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Plates were carried out. Voices rose again, softer than before, as if people were afraid to break something fragile. She kept her hands folded in her lap. Even though she had been invited to stay, she still felt like she was only borrowing the space. Her shoulders stayed tense, ready to stand up if someone told her to leave. A waiter approached with a small basket of bread. He paused, unsure, then set it down gently. "For you," he said. She looked up, surprised. I didn't order anything. It's okay, he replied. Just eat. She nodded and waited until he stepped away before reaching for a piece. She broke it in half and ate slowly, carefully, like someone who had learned not to rush food. At a nearby table, two women leaned toward each other. Did you hear how she played? One whispered, I still feel it. The other replied, like it came from somewhere deep. The girl heard them, but pretended not to. Compliments made her uncomfortable. She was more used to being unseen. The hostess stood near the front desk, watching from a distance. Her face looked tight, as if she were thinking hard about something she did not like to face. She glanced at the girl again and then looked away. The manager spoke quietly with a man in a dark coat. They both nodded as they talked, their eyes returning to the piano from time to time. The girl finished the bread and wiped her hands on her jacket. She felt fuller, but not just from the food. Something else sat in her chest, warm and confusing. She stared out the window. Cars moved past, their lights stretching across the glass. Outside, the world went on like it always had. Inside, she felt like time had bent slightly around her. Her thoughts drifted back to earlier that day. She had spent the afternoon helping her family where she could, carrying water, folding clothes, listening to worries she could not fix. When the evening came, she had slipped out quietly, following the sound of music she heard from the street. She had not planned to be brave. She only wanted to listen. A soft voice pulled her back to the present. May I sit? She looked up to see the older man from before, the one who had spoken up for her. He stood beside the table, holding his chair. Yes, she said quickly. Of course. He sat down slowly. You play beautifully, he said. She looked down again. Thank you. Do you play often? He asked. She nodded. Whenever I can. He smiled gently. It shows. They sat in silence for a moment. He did not push her to speak, and she appreciated that. Music saved me once, he said after a while. A long time ago. She glanced at him, curious but quiet. It's funny, he continued, how a few notes can remind you who you are. She nodded slowly. She understood that more than she could explain. The manager approached their table. I hope everything is all right, he said. Yes, the man replied. More than all right. The manager turned to the girl. I wanted to ask, he said carefully. Where did you learn to play like that? She hesitated, then answered honestly. At home. I just listen and practice. No lessons? He asked. She shook her head. The manager looked thoughtful. Would you be willing to play again later? Her eyes widened. I don't want to cause trouble. You wouldn't, he said. Only if you want to. She looked at the piano, then back at him. Maybe, she said softly. He smiled and stepped away. The older man stood as well. I'll let you rest, he said. Thank you for sharing your gift. She watched him leave, feeling a strange mix of pride and fear. Time passed slowly. She drank more water. A waiter brought her a small bowl of soup without asking. She thanked him and ate, warmth spreading through her body. More people glanced her way now, not staring, but curious. Some smiled. A few nodded as if they shared a secret with her. She wondered what they saw. She did not see a talented girl. She saw someone who had stepped where she was not allowed and somehow remained standing. Her gaze returned to the piano. It sat quietly, waiting. She remembered all the times she had been told no. No to lessons. No to concerts. No to dreams that cost money. Each no had built a wall she learned to climb instead of break. A waiter leaned close. They're asking if you'll play again, he whispered. Her heart beat faster. Now, whenever you're ready. She stood slowly, smoothing her jacket. Her legs felt weak as she walked toward the piano again. This time, no one tried to stop her. She sat down and placed her hands on the keys. The room grew quiet once more. This song was different. It was lighter. It carried hope. It spoke of mornings instead of nights, of open windows instead of closed doors. Her fingers danced gently, confidently now. The notes rose and fell like breath. People leaned forward in their seats. A few smiled through tears. The hostess stood frozen, her face unreadable. The girl played until the final note faded softly. Applause followed again, louder than before. She stood and bowed her head slightly, unsure what to do with the sound. The manager stepped forward. Thank you, he said. That meant more than you know. She returned to her table, her heart racing. Something had changed. She could feel it. The walls that once felt so high now looked thinner. The room that had rejected her now felt open. She did not know where the path would lead, but she sensed she had stepped onto it tonight. Outside, the streetlights glowed steadily. Inside, a quiet promise hung in the air, waiting to be fulfilled. The night had grown quieter. Many guests had finished their meals, but few were ready to leave. The girl sat at her table, feeling a strange pull in the room, as if something important was still waiting to happen. She watched the door from time to time, expecting someone to tell her it was over, that she had stayed long enough, but no one came. Instead, a woman from one of the larger tables stood up and walked toward her. She was dressed simply, not flashy, and her eyes were kind. "That music," the woman said softly. Stopping a few steps away, "It reminded me of someone I lost." The girl looked up, unsure how to respond. "I just wanted to thank you," the woman added. "You gave me something tonight." The girl nodded. "I'm glad," she said. It was all she could manage. The woman smiled and returned to her table moments later. Another guest approached, then another. Each one spoke quietly, sharing a feeling, a memory, or simply a thank you. The girl listened, overwhelmed but grateful. She had never been spoken to like this before. She was used to people looking past her, not at her. The hostess stood nearby, watching the small line form and fade. Her posture softened. The sharp edge in her expression was gone. When the girl was alone again, the hostess stepped forward. "I owe you an apology," she said. The girl stiffened. "It's okay," she replied quickly. "No," the hostess said gently. "It's not." She took a breath. "I judged you before I knew anything about you. That wasn't fair." The girl looked down at her hands. "I understand," she said, though she wasn't sure she did. The hostess nodded. "You shouldn't have had to prove your worth." The words stayed with the girl as the hostess walked away. Soon after, the manager returned, this time with another man. He was older, dressed neatly, and carried himself with calm confidence. "This is someone I'd like you to meet," the manager said. The man smiled warmly. "I help young people with music," he said. "I was here tonight by chance." The girl felt her chest tighten. "I don't have money," she said quickly. The man raised a hand. "I'm not here to ask for anything." They sat at the table. He asked her simple questions. How long she had played, what kind of music she liked, whether she had ever played in front of people before. She answered honestly, her voice soft but steady. "You have something special," the man said after listening. "Not just skill, feeling." She did not know how to respond to that. "I'd like to help you learn more. If you want," he continued. "Lessons, a better instrument, a chance." The room seemed to tilt. "I can't promise anything," she said slowly. "My life is complicated," he nodded. "Most meaningful lives are." He handed her a small card. "Think about it." She held the card like it might vanish. As the night drew on, the restaurant began to empty. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. Coats were pulled on. Goodbyes were said. The girl remained seated until the manager approached again. "We're closing soon," he said kindly. "But you're welcome back anytime." She stood quickly. "Thank you for letting me stay." He shook his head. "Thank you for reminding us why this place exists outside." The cold air wrapped around her again, but it felt different now. Lighter. She walked home slowly, replaying the night in her mind. The piano, the faces, the applause, the card in her pocket. At home, the small room was quiet. She sat at the old piano and placed her fingers on the worn keys. The sound was rough, uneven, but familiar. She played softly, thinking of the clean notes from earlier, of the way the room had listened. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine more. Not fame, not applause. Just a future where music did not have to stay hidden. She finished playing and sat in silence, holding that thought close. The night outside was deep and still, and somewhere beyond it, a new path waited, patient and real. Morning light slipped through the thin curtains of the small room. The girl woke before the noise of the street began. For a moment, she lay still, listening to her own breathing, wondering if the night before had been real or only a dream. She reached into the pocket of her jacket and felt the card. It was still there. She sat up and looked at the old piano across the room. The keys were worn and slightly yellowed. One corner of the lid was chipped. She loved it anyway. She always had. She washed her face with cold water and brushed her hair as neatly as she could. Then she sat down and played. Not loudly, just enough to wake the room. The music sounded hopeful. Later that day, she showed the card to her family. They listened quietly as she explained what had happened. They did not interrupt. When she finished, the room stayed silent for a long moment. "Do you want to try?" someone finally asked. She nodded. "I think I should." That afternoon, she returned to the restaurant area, not to go inside, but to stand across the street and look at the building again. It felt smaller in daylight, Less frightening. She thought about the looks she had received. The cold ones. Then the warm ones. She realized something important. People had not changed. Their attention had. A few days later, she met the man again in a quiet music room filled with light. The piano there was larger, deeper in sound. When she touched the keys, they answered her gently, like they had been waiting. She played. He listened. When she finished, he smiled. "We'll start slowly," he said. "One step at a time," she agreed. The days that followed were not easy. She still walked the same streets. She still wore the same jacket. Life did not suddenly turn bright and perfect, but something inside her had shifted. She practiced every day, sometimes on her old piano, sometimes on borrowed ones. Her fingers grew stronger, her ears sharper. She learned new songs. She learned new ways to feel old ones. Weeks passed. One evening, she was invited back to the restaurant. This time, she entered through the front door without hesitation. The hostess recognized her and smiled. "There's a table ready," she said. The girl nodded and walked inside. She sat at the piano again, but this time with permission, with support, and with calm confidence. The room filled once more with quiet attention. She played the song that had first opened the door for her. When she finished, the applause was gentle, respectful, not loud, not overwhelming. It was enough. Afterward, she sat at a table near the window. A meal was placed in front of her. She ate slowly, grateful, present. She no longer felt like she was borrowing space. She belonged. As months went by, the story of that night traveled farther than she ever expected. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. A girl had been turned away. A girl had played anyway. People had listened. She continued to grow, not just as a musician, but as a person. She learned to speak when she once stayed silent. She learned to stand when she once waited to be pushed aside. She never forgot where she came from, and she never forgot the feeling of being unseen. Years later, when she walked past restaurants or concert halls, she looked at the doors differently. She noticed who was standing outside, who was waiting. Sometimes she stopped, sometimes she listened. Because she knew something others often forgot. Talent does not ask for permission, and worth does not depend on a table. The music had taught her that. And she carried it with her, always.